Okay, so we want to go from the 50s to the 60s. So let me just recap. The 50s, for the whole decade, we had $6.4 million of revenue for all 10 years combined, and our operating ratio was a 98.5, which again indicates to the point you've been making about how we were struggling to survive and cash was, not easy to get to. But we go into the 60s, and the revenue increases 480%, and the operating ratio goes from a 98.5 for the 50s to a 94.4 for the 60s, a nice improvement. So tell us a little bit about the 60s.
And I look at the 60s as a decade of stabilization, probably. We had opened 6 service centers in the 50s, Greenville being our last in 1959. Did not open any in the 60s. We operated the whole decade with the same 6 terminals we started with, 6 service centers. But we really were trying to get the operation stabilized. You have to realize that we had our first $1 million year in 1959, and here we move into the 60s. We were not a big company at all, trying to get the management structured in our facilities. And that was the year that we brought some stability to the system. The only real thing I think of when I think of back in the 60s, and it was significant, we were sitting around one day trying to figure out, even as small as we were, and we were really small compared to people we were competing with, but how can we differentiate this company from our competitors out there? What can we do to give us the opportunity to grow? And we thought of one thing, and that was to try to offer next-day service from Atlanta to South Carolina. Now, operation then was strictly Atlanta to South Carolina. That's basically all we did. And we thought about it and thought it wasn't being done. The normal service from Atlanta those days were 2 to 3 days. That's all any other trucking company was giving. That's all the customers expected. It's all they'd ever gotten. And we thought if we could somehow figure out a way to give next-day service, it really would set us aside. So we chose the hardest lane we could think of. In time, the line haul from Atlanta to Florence and Atlanta to Charleston about the same. But once you get to Florence, you've got another 60 or 70 miles to go to the beach. So we chose Atlanta to Florence, and we ran it for 6 months. We wanted to be sure we could do it, and we weren't really sure. And the old axiom, as you well know, is you never want to get your advertising ahead of your performance. So we were determined to see if we could do it before we told anybody. We found out we could. And so we got established giving that next day service. And it set us aside and started us on that period of growth that you see in the 60s. It's the thing that set us aside then. And the thing that really surprised me is our competitors didn't pick up on it. They saw us doing it. They saw us taking market share. And I think probably the reason they didn't is that we were so small, they just ignored it. And they figured, they can't take much business, and they're probably going to go broke trying to do it. It's so difficult to do that. Right. But we did it, and it served us well. So we came out of the 60s in a much stronger position than we went into it.
Well, that's great. It's interesting to see how, today our service is everything, and it goes back to the 60s. That's incredible. Well, so we're going into the 70s. And so let me recap again. The 60s had $31 million in revenue for the whole decade, not a year, a whole decade, 94.4 operating ratio. But here we come into the 70s, and boy, do things change. Revenue goes up 730% for the decade, and the OR, listen to this now, the OR goes from a 94.4 to an 84.6 for the 70s. The 70s will be the most profitable decade for us, at least up to this point, and probably forever. So tell us about the 70s.
Good. Well, we had established ourselves in the end of the 60s. Operations running smooth. 70s, we didn't really add but 3 facilities. In 1972, we added Charlotte, and then a little later in the decade, we added Augusta and Albany. The Charlotte one had the most impact, but interestingly, we opened in a 5-door service center in Charlotte, and it just fascinates me as I look around today, and we started off in a 5-door service center. Today we've got 2 major service centers in Charlotte, and still growing. It's amazing. But at the first 8 years we were in Charlotte, we could only operate between Charlotte and Georgia. That was our operating authority, which really meant we were operating between Charlotte and Atlanta. And that's what we concentrated on, and we fast took the market. We really did. It was a major movement. Didn't make us very popular with our competitors, but it grew rapidly. But the 70s, we were just cooking. We had everything working right. We were building density every day, still basically operating in the first 6 facilities, plus Charlotte, then later in Augusta and Albany. But every time we grew, and we were growing rapidly, we just added to the density. We were more productive and therefore more profitable. It was a great era. A lot of good things were happening. And one other thing happened in the 70s, and I was elected chairman of the American Trucking Association. And I mention that for one reason only. The chairman is really the face of the American Trucking Association. You go out and make speeches, but you spend a lot of time in Washington. You call in on congressmen, you testifying before congressional committees. And about that time, there's a lot of conversation going about deregulation, which is going to be a major, cataclysmic change in the industry. And most of the trucking company people just didn't have any sense that it was going to come, didn't believe it. It was sort of a head in the sand approach. But because I had the opportunity to be in Washington so much, it became apparent to me it was coming. If you talk to the people in Congress who were the ones that were going to vote it into being, it was a thing that had a full head of steam. So I got to worrying about what are we going to do or what can we do to prepare this company. And as I looked around, this sudden realization came, we had no way to price our business. Over all the years of regulation, we didn't have to. There was no discounting. All our rates were set by the Commerce Commission, the federal government, and each year we get a standard across-the-board increase of 2% or 3%. Did not apply to any shipment, just your business in general. So we were running with a lot of very overpriced business, a lot of very profitable business, a lot of underpriced business, very unprofitable business, but we had no idea which is which. And I realized we had no concept within our company to price it, nor did anybody else in the industry. So I started looking around. I kept hearing about a man named Tommy Thompson, and we talked. I interviewed Tommy. Tommy had spent a lifetime in the trucking industry. He had the IQ of a genius. He was one of the first people that really realized the power of a little computer. They were just beginning to come into effect. And he had developed a system both to measure the productivity on the docking and P&D operations and on the pricing of freight, how you could actually price individual shipments. So we contracted with Tommy to come in and set up his systems with us, and it worked, thank goodness. We went into deregulation. There was total chaos within the industry. Folks were scrambling everywhere trying to figure out how to price different parts of the business, and we had a pretty good idea. And we still pretty much own the Thompson system. We've tweaked it over the years, modified it a good bit, but the basic concept still serves us pretty well. Probably gave us a tremendous advantage as we went from the 70s into the 80s.
That was a brilliant move. I mean, now I'm looking back at it from 2019 and been intimately involved with the Thompson system. That was a brilliant move that you did. And